is the scariest story you know that is 1000 true? Story 1: The DuPont factory and their Teflon story. Literally one company poisoning the entire planet and getting away with it. Sounds so ridiculously fictional, but it absolutely happened, and every living being on the planet still suffers its consequences. Story 2: Over the hill from where I was raised. In the 1930s there was a family with a son who had serious mental problems. It had gotten bad enough they were going to put him in a home. The father took the rest of the family to town while mom stayed with the boy. When the family returned, they found the boy walking around the house with his mom's head on a broomstick. Story 3: This happened in a small rural community not far from the capital city of our state. Think under an hour to the city, 15 to 20 minutes from suburbia. Many years ago, a man decided that his wife was cheating on him, so he killed her. Then, he proceeded to kill his 7 children, along with his sister-in-law and her baby, who were visiting. Was due to be hanged, but the death penalty was then banned. Wound up spending only 7 years in jail. Upon release, he moved states and changed his name, then married a woman with 7 children and lived his life happily. They had no idea until after he died. You can Google the Hope Forest Massacre for more details. Story 4: The Bhopal Union Carbide disaster, the worst industrial accident in the world. Thousands of people died in agony with absolutely no warning. Story 5: I worked my whole life in government. Politicians truly are corrupt, and we might as well get used to it because we're not going to change it. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's absolutely true. Vote for the lesser of 2 evils and move on. Don't be disappointed when they don't deliver, because half the things they promised are not even feasible. I would see local politicians promise things that I knew they couldn't financially deliver. There was no way. The public still buys into it. They don't know any better. Example: the president does not have much control over gas prices. Get that out of your head. Story 6: That time scientists said that they didn't know what would happen when they turned the Hadron Collider at CERN on, then turned it on, and now we are all living in some alternate reality version of Idiocracy and the Twilight Zone. Story 7: Toxic humidifier disinfectant case in South Korea, which affected more than 5,000 victims. When humidifiers were still new, families with children rushed to get their hands on this new product, which in turn did nothing to help the victims and only introduced them to on Earth. 1,814 victims dead and more than 7,000 injured. Story 8: Very random, but I always thought the Bodom Lake murders were scary, as the fact that the murderer might have actually shown up at the kids' funerals, and by the time the police knew they couldn't find him. The overall brutality of it, being a kid completely isolated in the wilderness with a few of your friends and having a Friday the 13th-like scenario play out. Scary as, lots of scarier stories for sure, but the details of this one always gave me goosebumps if you read up on it. Story 9: One day, I was at my temp job, when an announcement came over the PA system that everybody was to stay in their office, lock the door, and not come out under any circumstances until they were told to. Having absolutely no idea what was going on, I locked the door of my office, jammed a chair under the doorknob, sat on the floor in the knee hole of my desk, and read the book I brought to read at lunch. About an hour later, they gave the all clear, and I went back to whatever task I'd been doing beforehand. We later found out that a disgruntled former employee had showed up with a Thompson submachine gun and started shooting people. Story 10: The murder of James Bulger, and the fact that one of the killers is now married with kids. Absolute. Edit: he wasn't married, that was me misremembering. He Venables, the one who's been in and out of jail for possession of child abuse material since his release, was found to be in a relationship with a woman who had a young kid. Thanks to the new identities, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that either or both of them could have gone on to have their own kids. Story 11: My mum and older brother had to shelter from a mass shooter UK, on a rampage, incident. Story 12: Michigan, 2019. On Christmas Eve, a man named Kevin Bacon met a man on Grindr and went to his house. The man stabbed and ate Kevin. Apparently it was the first time he tried to do that, but the other victim about 2 months earlier escaped. Story 13: When they were kids. My aunt's sister was kidnapped in her early teens. During the late 50s, I think. She was taken from her front yard. Her body nor the killer was ever found. Years later, back in the mid-80s, someone confessed to disposing of her body at this little-known state park in SC, which just so happened to be less than a mile away from our neighborhood. The police and news were all up and down the road for at least a week, but nothing was ever found. Keep an eye on your children. Edit: after the cops quit searching, my little brother and I would scavenge the woods in hopes of finding some clues. Nothing. That area had a weird vibe. I saw a UFO one night. There was a reclusive millionaire that lived close by. F-16s would buzz the treetops about once a month. There was also a plantation house nearby, and old slave houses could be found in the forest, as well as a cemetery dating back to the 1800s. The canal at the park was built with slave labor. Also rumored was a church near the cemetery, but we never found anything. Story 14: Casey Anthony now has a TikTok to revamp her Imagine. Share advice and support for women. Advice: support the LGBTQ community in memory of her daughter. She was also dating someone with a kid. Story 15: Someone already said Junko Furuta, but a runner-up for spooky as is the Setagaya family murders. Something about the murderer staying in their home for a while after and leaving urine in the toilet terrified me when I first read it. Story 16: My friend was on a cruise ship. She'd been leading a guy on all night at the bar getting drinks paid for. At the end of the night she wanted to go her own way. He wouldn't take no for an answer and managed to convince her to let him walk her back to her room. Every inch he took a mile. He asked to pee in her bathroom as his room was at the other end of the ship. She eventually said yes. He sat down on her bed and wouldn't leave. She convinced him to go eventually. She got stuck in the bathroom later that evening, so they called security to her room. Lo and behold, the guy from earlier is running down the ship waving her spare room key and apologizing, thinking the security call was because of him. Had stolen it when he sat down and was going to come back during the night. Story 17. The majority of those that attempt suicide by jumping under an underground train survive initial contact. When they are transferred to hospital, they are usually placed in an induced coma. After they are revived, they usually die of shock. Story 18. The San Isidro mass shooting. It really was among the first really big senseless mass shootings in America. You're just going to McDonald's to get a quick lunch and then you're dead. Story 19. Luis Garavito. He is by far the worst serial killer pedophile I have ever heard of. He was active in Colombia in the 90s, and he would lure homeless young boys into the jungle where he would offer them things like food, money, or jobs, and he would make them walk for many miles so they'd be too tired to fight back or escape. Afterwards, he would savagely rape and torture the boys. I don't even want to get into detail about what he did. Trust me, it's worse than what you think. He was even convicted of 189 murders, 189, but it's believed he may have murdered as many as 300 to 400 boys. There has even been mass graves found containing his victims' remains with dozens of them. Luis' crimes were so prolific and brutal. The police even thought it was the work of a cartel, a militant group since this was during Colombia's civil war, or even a satanic cult, because they couldn't fathom one man could have killed that many or been that brutal. What's even more shocking is Luis only sentenced to about 20 years in prison because Colombia doesn't have life imprisonment or the death sentence. But just before he got parole, he died from cancer. Luis was so prolific that wherever he lived, local reports of child molestation increased substantially. Story 20. The 2022 Caribbean diving disaster. Absolute nightmare fuel. The fact that the employer did nothing and those men were just left there to die. They admitted they had no rescue plan, citing that they had no legal responsibility to rescue the men. Also, if you value your sleep and sanity, do not read about Unit 731. Story 21. There's several answers. The Tunguska event is creepy, not scary, but is true and unsolved. The Black Death killed about 50 of Britain. It is also not eradicated. A kid at a neighboring high school of mine died from it. Prion disease. Story 22. In 2024, the most powerful nation on earth, both economically and militarily, elected a moron that was backed by rich fascists, mostly because he spouted racist bullshit that appealed to other morons. It didn't help that the opposition was a black female, no matter how qualified or smart she was. Story 23. What Carla Homolka and her husband Paul Bernardo did, and the fact that she is free today. She is married to her lawyer's brother with whom she has 3 children. Amongst many crimes they committed, they drugged and raped 15-year-old Tammy, Carla's little sister, in the family home on Christmas Eve. Because of the drugs they secretly gave young Tammy, she choked on her own vomit and died. They also tortured and raped 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French before gruesomely murdering both. I am a peace-loving person who can't even kill a mouse, but I would execute them both without a qualm because of what they did. They recorded their crimes and got excited watching the tapes together. Story 24. After reading many of these comments, the answer is simple. Humans are the scariest story that is 1000 true. Although there is a lot of good in the world, at the same time humans are the most scary and vile of all living things. Story 25. The Second Holocaust. The one in Gaza that prestigious media outlets like the New York Times and the Atlantic have been lying and gaslighting us about. Story 26. The story of the priest John Geoghegan in Boston. He freely little boys, and when the parents tried to stop it they threatened them with removal from the church and the jobs that these people relied on. When it got bad enough and nobody would allow their children around him, the church just moved him to another patronage to start all over again. This went on for 20+ years. That's up enough. When they finally charged him and brought this to light, the Catholic Church fought it in court with all they had. Almost like this is normal, and this guy went a little too far. Where I grew up Catholic, a altar boy and whatnot, nothing like this happened. Because we didn't depend on the church, so there was no easy victims. Story 27. Not a story for faint-hearted ones. When I was a soldier several years ago, my job was to recover and extract people of my country from dangerous places, or people with precious informations for us. A foreign woman was in touch with our intel service and we had to reach her in exchange for some information to hunt down a terrorist. Then she could get the French nationality and end up in a safe place for the rest of her life. We found her dead. She was spotted somehow and those animals killed her by filling her vagina with molten metal. Almost a decade later I am still having nightmares about that, about the smell, and I am still wondering what kind of inhumanity you need to have to do that to someone else. This day more than any else, I learned that some people are looking human but they are not. Story 28. People love to believe in conspiracy theories that there is some secret group of elites that control the world. The truth is much more sobering. No one is really in control. No one has a much better idea of what is going on than you probably do. I mean, yeah, there are intelligence agencies and whatnot, but that old adage, the more you know you don't know, really does hold true. Story 29. The Great Leap Forward. The details are highly suppressed but holy. It's the greatest man-made disaster in world history. 45 million Chinese dead from 1958 to 19,624 years. Story 30. The untouched power narcos have in Mexico. You could just find yourself at the wrong place at the wrong time and you're forcefully disappeared and God bless your poor soul. Now of course, I know wrong place wrong time isn't exclusive to Mziko, but it's just far more common. You either get recruited, mistaken for somebody, you happen to see something you weren't supposed to, or just subject to somebody's sadism and you'll suffer a terrible fate. Not just you, your family will have to turn to body searching groups because police are not only incompetent, but actually complicit, and good luck finding a bone that matches within the next few years. It's terrifying, genuinely. Story 31, the murder of Oki Al-Kite. It genuinely terrifies me, the idea that he was seemingly picked at random, and that the murder just vanished, the fact that he planned everything with care, and the way he tortured that poor man. The guy feels like a real-life boogeyman. It gives me the creeps. There are very good write-ups on the true crime subreddits, but keep in mind it's disturbing. Story 32, absolutely horrifying, Junko Furuta. Warning, you will not be the same person after reading her story. Alternatively, a lesser-known but still tragic story would be the case of Kenny Dobbins, although this is probably not scary, just outright disheartening. Story 33, the serial killer Israel Keys. He would bury kill kits all around the US, so he could go back at any time and there wouldn't be a trace of him buying sketchy. And he didn't have an MO, he killed teens to the elderly, men and women, didn't matter. The story of how he got caught is wild too. Story 34, a local story that haunts me is the murder of a former coworker, Sean Dugas. He had a Magic the Gathering card collection worth 6 figures, including a Black Lotus IRC that was incredibly rare at the time. He befriended these two brothers who eventually chased him around his house and bludgeoned him to death with a hammer before stuffing his body into a plastic bin and filling it with concrete. It's so disturbing to me because Sean was such a chill, hippie dude who got a talking to for wearing JNCOs to interviews. He was a gifted reporter and had a hand in starting a homeless encampment that served hundreds for years after his death. He was a wacky and kind dude, and the thought of the terror he went through in his final moments frightens me more than any horror movie I've ever seen. Story 35, Bhopal, India. Gas leak accident in Bhopal, India on December 3, 1984. On December 3, 1984, over 500,000 people in the vicinity of the Union Carbide India Limited pesticide plant in Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh, India were exposed to the highly toxic gas methyl isocyanate, in what is considered the world's worst industrial disaster. A government affidavit in 2006 stated that the leak caused 558,125 injuries, including 38,478 temporary partial injuries and approximately 3,900 severely and permanently disabling injuries. Story 36, the lake that killed an entire village when it basically burped. The Lake Nyos disaster, a crater lake in Cameroon, caused the deaths of around 1,700 people and 3,500 livestock in 1986 due to a limnic eruption. The lake suddenly released a large cloud of carbon dioxide, suffocating nearby villages and livestock. Story 37, just recently, hundreds of women were raped and burned alive during the chaos as a Rwandan-backed rebel M23 took control of Congolese city of Goma. The female inmates were attacked in their wing inside Goma's Munzen's prison. Several thousand men stormed the female wing, raped, decapitated and then set the female prison on fire with hundreds of women still alive inside. Mind you, there were babies and children in there with their moms. Some sources say there only were 9 to 13 survivors of the female prison. Other sources say there were no survivors of the massacre. We speak of the terrors of Rwanda, but it is happening under our noses again, this time in the DRC. There are so many other atrocities happening there right now. This is just one example. To make it even worse, practically no one is talking about it. Other than the obligatory news article that gets swallowed amidst hundreds of other articles about the Kardashians or something else. Story 38, I got a temp job working in public health on the program to reduce the number of people smoking. It was my first day and I was going through reports to get up to speed with the organization. I came across a CD-ROM marked tobacco industry documents and decided to take a look. One of the documents was an internal memo from the 1950s by an executive in one of the tobacco companies saying they had discovered the passive smoking caused lung cancer and needed to suppress the findings because if they got out it would lead to legislation about smoking in public places which would ultimately affect sales. The memo outlined what they should do to suppress the information, one of which was hire scientists to lie and say that smoking is safe. This ended up happening. You can Google it. It's called the White Coat Project, and to this day, many people continue to believe that the evidence that smoking causes lung cancer has been falsified. Story 39, a mentally ill man stabbed his entire family and then himself to death this month, the day of his son's graduation. Story 40, most of the scariest ones have been mentioned already, so I'll add one S21 prison in Cambodia during the Khmer Rouge regime. It was in a repurposed high school, existed for 4 years, had around 20,000 prisoners in those 4 years, out of which only 12 are known to have survived. There are records of over 150 people being released, however they were likely recaptured and executed. The building is still there, you can visit it as a museum. Story 41, American Primeval, the historical drama based on the 1857 Mountain Meadow Massacre due to the Utah War. A sinister massacre took place not far from St. George. Perpetrators used psychological warfare and mass hysteria ambushed the Baker Fancher Party. Mormon teachings taught moral panics and the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. A memorial plaque reads here 120 men, women, and children were massacred in cold blood early in September, 1857. They were from Arkansas. Utah's history is chilling to me as a Ute. Story 42. The drunk captain of the Exxon Valdez running aground and spilled 11 million gallons of crude in Alaska, and a bunch of wildlife, and was an environmental disaster. Story 43. 8 years old was found murdered on a rural road close to where I live. As far as I know, they never found who did it, and the event's been shunned to the point only the older generations are aware of it having happened in the first place. Story 44. I urge you to read the entire horribly depraved Wikipedia article, but the TLDR is this: Armin Maywes posted on a fetish website that he was looking for someone to be voluntarily killed and cannibalized. He found someone, and did it. Story 45. Sadly, the children are now starving to death in Gaza cause Israel has been refusing to let aid through. Hopefully it will change as from today. Have seen here on Reddit the people from Gaza who have called for help and awareness of this horror happening now have been called AI, grifters and whatnot by Redditor refusing to believe this. Story 46. You and everyone you know can die at any given moment for almost any reason: aneurysm, crushed by a falling tree, hit by a car, throw a clot, carbon monoxide, heart attack, goes on and on. Story 47. Fatima Quintana on February 5, 2015. Fatima, a 12-year-old girl, was intercepted by 3 neighbors. They attempted to rape her, and Fatima fought with all her might to defend herself and reach her home, which was just a few meters away. These 3 men, angered by the girl's anger, stabbed her more than 90 times, raped her, and tortured her. Even after this, Fatima was still alive in total agony. Upon realizing this, her 3 neighbors smashed her skull by throwing rocks at her. In October 2021, the 3 perpetrators were convicted. Jos Juan Hernandez Tecrucio received life imprisonment. Luis Angel Atade Reyes was sentenced to 73 years and 8 months in prison. Misael Atade Reyes, a minor at the time of the crime, he was initially released due to lack of evidence, but was later rearrested and sentenced to 5 years. He is currently free. Unfortunately, Fatima's family has had to travel across Mexico, fleeing retaliation from the families of these individuals, who are also involved in organized crime. Jos Juan and Luis Angel's sentences could still be reduced to parole. Fatima's family is still fighting to ensure that the government upholds its promise of justice, and that these 2 scumbags are not released. Story 48. The story of the Watcher House legit kept me up at night. Imagine buying your dream home and then getting creepy letters from someone saying they've been watching the house for generations, and the stuff they wrote was so specific and eerie, like they knew what rooms you were in. Story 49. The nicest man I know from the nicest family I know shot his mother, then himself during the first weeks of COVID as he believed he wouldn't be able to travel to tend his livestock. Mental illness can happen to anyone. Story 50. The Stanford Prison Experiment. In August 1971, Stanford University in Palo Alto, California turned the basement of their psychology building into a fake prison, and half of the students who volunteered for the experiment were guards and the other half were prisoners. The purpose of it was to demonstrate how authority and power dynamics can affect a human being's capacity for evil. After the experiment began, the guards started to beat and assault the guards without even being told to do so. They would hit them with batons, wake them up late at night and force them to do jumping jacks and push-ups, and other things. The prisoners started to have mental breakdowns over it, and things got so out of control that the experiment, which was supposed to last 2 weeks, was terminated after 6 days. It also led to discussion about codes of ethics in prisons, and led to some of them even having new rules like juvenile offenders having to be separated from the adult offenders. Story 51. Not a widespread story or famous, but a call I ran as an EMT on a pediatric ICU transport. Some details changed for confidentiality purposes. A 15-year-old, perfectly healthy, athletic girl, came home from school one day, and her parents noticed she was more tired than usual, a little out of it, and weak off balance. They thought she might be getting sick but took her to the ER because something didn't feel right. I showed up with my ICU team about 4 hours later. She was coding for the 6th time, being bagged by hand to breathe since she wouldn't breathe on her own well enough and wasn't taking a ventilator well. She coded another 3 times while we tried to stabilize her. Got endless blood, plasma, epinephrine, and fluids whole. We tried to keep her heart beating. She developed a double hemopneumothorax in one lung and the ER doc put a chest tube in right there in the trauma bay to drain it. She was still responsive to pain enough that she tried to push the doctor away when the doc made the incision between her ribs. There was a lot more, but about 6 hours later we got her to the children's hospital. 2 days later I saw one of the staff from that team and asked if there was anything they could tell me on what caused it, if she was going to be okay, etc. My management and stress management team had also reached out to the hospital requesting an update on my behalf for my mental health after the call and received the same information. They told me the repeated full arrests had caused her to form blood clots, which at that point had resulted in the amputation of 2 limbs. She had been declared brain dead, and parents were planning on pulling the plug. Scans revealed a ruptured AVM. There was quite literally nothing we could have done to save her with the location and severity of the rupture. It was amazing that she survived as long as she did. That call still haunts me. More than 5 years later, I still think about her. The possibility that anyone out there has an AVM they don't know about, that could decide to rupture at any moment, you'd never know until it was too late. Story 52 The Neolithic male bottleneck. In the time between us inventing agriculture and starting to use copper tools, violence and cannibalism was so widespread worldwide that about 85 of all men died, nearly resulting in our extinction. Story 53 A couple 50s and their son 26 were all drinking moonshine together. They had been drinking for 2 days. The son suddenly decided to use a match to set a rolled-up newspaper on fire. He then decided to use said newspaper to light his mother's dress on fire. As she was trying to put herself out, the husband yelled, "Let her die. She's no good anyhow." They did finally help put her out by throwing a bucket of water on her. They then left her on the floor of the house for 3 days before finally getting her help. Her body from her shoulders to her ankles had been burned. When she was first admitted to the hospital, they didn't think she would live. They were both arrested. But it doesn't look like either served time. It was 1931. The only plus side to the story is that the woman lived another 15 years. The husband apparently died the next year, but we haven't been able to find an actual month and date of death. We also haven't been able to find a death certificate, obituary, or cause of death. Story 54 The Holodomor. In much of the world it seems unheard of, but it is how Ukraine knew the lengths that Russia would go to exterminate them in order to steal their land. It happened nearly 100 years ago, and Russia still thinks they are entitled to that land. I only came across the story by accident since I am a prolific reader and I had to look it up. I couldn't understand how you could try to starve an entire country's population, and it wouldn't come up in history class having been overshadowed by the Holocaust. Was there even a footnote somewhere I missed? Story 55 The Killer Clowns of 2017 was terrifying. I saw only one, and it wasn't too long ago, like 3 months or so. They were just standing in the parking garage at my apartment complex. Then when I went inside they had a cackle that was identical to one of which I am 15, and this scared the out of me. Story 56 The Silent Twins. June and Jennifer Gibbons. June and Jennifer were identical twins born in 1963 in Wales. From early childhood, they were inseparable but also completely isolated from everyone else. They developed their own secret language, refused to speak to family, teachers, or therapists, and mirrored each other's every move perfectly. As they grew older, their bond became toxic. They believed one had to die for the other to truly live. They began committing petty crimes, arson, vandalism, and were eventually institutionalized at Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility, for 11 years. Then, out of nowhere, Jennifer whispered to June, "I'm going to die, it's time." And she did. Jennifer died mysteriously of sudden inflammation of the heart in 1993. No drugs, no poison, no clear medical cause, just gone. June later said they had agreed one of them had to die to free the other. After Jennifer's death, June began speaking and reintegrated into society like nothing ever happened. Story 57 Chernobyl. The fact a nuclear disaster happened and how it happened just terrifies me. All the people basically sent in to die to prevent it from becoming more devastating, and it's still uninhabitable and will be for a long time yet. Just the scale of the event and not ever really knowing the total death count is horrific. Story 58 The Romania of Ceausescu. That is what I think of when the right keep hammering away at their pro-birth policies. That dictator outlawed birth control and abortion in an effort to increase the country's population. The result of that keeps reverberating. Story 59 I cleaned at a restaurant and I was the only person there. In the men's room there was always a presence, but it was good. In the kitchen I sometimes saw a waiter, but there was no person there. In the cleaning kitchen was the entrance to the freezer. Every time I would clean there the temperature of the freezer would go up. If I left it would come down. There also was a bar in the cellar, with a small wine cellar where there was some sort of jail. It was always super cold. One day I yelled, "All right, I am going to make a picture, show yourself." In the back left corner was a black figure in front of rows of glasses. Between us you could see 4 white clouds swirl as if to protect me. I felt so eerie I quit that job. I have never been there since. Story 60 Just about everything Imperial Japan did during the 1930s to 1945, they absolutely 100 deserved the nukes and spared them from an invasion that would make D-Day look like a walk in the park. Story 61 Good friend got trapped in a 20-year hole of marriage and then lived in a cyclical battle for 15 years after never-ending lawsuits for what amounts to pennies while incurring massive debt to defend themselves from losing even the smallest convenience in life. Story 62 A guy facing eviction decided to shoot at cops in the Garfield neighborhood of Pittsburgh. I was working at a preschool less than 3 blocks away and had to shelter in place while SWAT vehicles blocked our cars from leaving. Story 63 More sad and up, but it is scary to think someone would do this. I live in Southern California, about 30 minutes away from me. I can't remember the exact year or how long ago, but within the last 30 to 50 years, a woman bus driver for children had picked up all the kids, drove to the train tracks, and purposely got hit by a train. Everyone died. Story 64 This haunts me because I can see how easily it happened. In 1995, in the UK, a man was driving a low loader truck with a mechanical digger on the back. He didn't realize that the arm of the digger wasn't properly secured. As he drove down the twisty roads in Cornwall, the arm would swing out into oncoming traffic. The bucket of the digger ripped the roof from several cars, decapitating the drivers. 5 people died. I don't know if that was 5 separate cars, and I think 2 were injured. The truck driver was completely unaware of the devastation he was leaving in his wake. I think of him sometimes. How awful it must be to know you were unintentionally responsible for 5 deaths. He ended up in a psychiatric hospital with PTSD, and many first responders also needed PTSD treatment. Horrifying. Story 65 2002 Gujarat riots genocide in India. It wasn't just a riot, it was a calculated massacre that left deep scars on India's secular fabric. One of the most horrifying incidents was what happened in Narodapatiya, a Muslim neighborhood in Ahmedabad. On February 28, 2002, a mob of around 1,000 people, armed with swords, petrol bombs and acid, attacked the locality. Over 97 Muslims were brutally killed, many burned alive, women were gang-raped, mutilated, and their bodies set on fire. A pregnant woman named Kausar Banu had her womb slit open and her unborn baby thrown into the fire. Another chilling episode occurred in Best Bakery, Vadodara, where 14 people were burned alive, most of them from a Muslim family trying to hide in the bakery where they worked. The mob blocked the fire brigade and police from intervening. There were reports of police officers either standing by or actively assisting the mobs. Victims later testified how they pleaded for help, but were told you asked for it. What makes this even more terrifying is the level of political protection allegedly involved, the delayed justice, and the deep-rooted hatred that fueled such inhuman acts. It wasn't just murder, it was neighbors killing neighbors, the state looking away, and justice being delayed for decades. That's not a story, that's a nightmare millions lived through. Story 66 in Bel Air, Ohio. The town that almost hired Tamir Rice's killer, Nathan Brooks, offered up his decapitated parents to Satan. Story 67, just 15 minutes away from me in Matawan, New Jersey, is where the real story behind the movie Jaws actually happened. What really happened? Story 68, when I lived in Alberta, there was a horrific accident with a road construction crew. They dumped a whole dump truck load of hot asphalt on top of a 16-year-old kid who had just got his first job. He didn't make it. Was about 15 years ago now. Story 69, I recently learned about Woodstock 1999, and some of the stories coming from that festival just make my skin crawl. Very understaffed and very unprepared for the weekend and all the mayhem that was about to occur. From people wielding knives and slashing at people in mosh pits to all the deaths and assaults that occurred over the course of the weekend, there's one thing that really stuck with me, and I was appalled when I heard it. There was a girl that was crowd surfing, and then she was grabbed and held down by multiple people in the middle of the crowd while bands were performing. Multiple people took turns gang raping her, and no one in the crowd tried to stop them. There's many horrible stories like that from that weekend. 39 people were arrested that weekend, and out of everyone arrested, only one of them was charged for assault. Story 70 Nazino Island is a pretty messed up story, and even how the victims got there, many being children just snatched from the streets, is haunting. They became animalistic and violent in most cases, with the men who were there who were arrested for actual crimes. The story of the woman who was eaten alive but was still alive and talking to her boyfriend will never leave my mind. Then of course there's Junko Furuta and Sylvia Likens stories. Story 71 A woman was on a bushwalk one day, tripped over what she thought was a log and kept on going. When they caught Ted Buddy, he recalled in an interview one of the weirdest things was when he was disposing of a body one time and a lady in the bush approached, tripped over the body and just kept going. She didn't see him in the distance, so he didn't do anything about it. Story 72 When I was younger, we had a place called the Mushroom Tunnels. It was an old train tunnel that curved around a slight bend that was built of brick that was no longer used. If you stood at one end you couldn't see the other opening, and after being closed to trains, they built massive doors on each end to grow mushrooms. They used to run ghost tours though there, and as little feral kids, my boyfriend and I would hide and jump scare the tours. One night I didn't go and he went, but instead of the tour coming a car came and he kept himself hidden in the tunnel train cutouts, like small manholes you would step into if a train was passing, as he thought it was the cops coming for him, being a menace. He watched 3 people pull a body from the trunk and dump it into the manhole cutout next to him. Every second manhole cutout had a pit drop for some reason. He came round after they left, just totally shaken, and when I convinced him to go to the cops they blew us off. We went back again and found a cardigan and a girl's sock at the bottom of the pit that was not there the previous night, took it back to the cops, and again, they dismissed us. Absolutely no one believed what he said, but it really messed him up for years, as literally nothing ever came from it.